Hello, welcome to my recap of all the books I read in 2021. So in order to make this more organized, I'm going to divide it in sections. One section is going to be books about theater, which can be theater theory or plays. Another section will be just theory, metaphor theory, general philosophy. Another section would be poetry, books with images, novels, and so on and so forth, like the rest. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Let's go. So I don't want to go play by play explaining everything that is on the play and making like a summary. That will be too boring. So I'm just gonna briefly mention the books that I read and if I like them or not. This is Susan Laurie Parks' American play. It's an interesting play. Susan Laurie Parks makes this connection between, critique of modern America or North America, the U.S. There's a lot of race components and race theory, and it's a very interesting theater, especially when you consider like her background and whatnot. So that was interesting. Similarly, this is Master Harold and the Boys by Arthur Fugard, also talking about racism and colonialism and so on and so forth. O'Neill, Long Day's Journey into the Night, pretty classical play. I mean, you can find summaries online. It's okay, super realistic, nice play. This is Lying in the Streets by Judith Thompson. Cool play, mostly like some decisions are strange. It is written for the stage, if that makes sense. Everything is like, oh, the performer sits down, the light changes, a table enters, or the performer stops being like this and moves that way. It's very aware that it's a theater play, and that's cool. But it also it's very distracting to read for some odd reason. It's okay, it didn't blow my mind, but it's fine. This is Snow in August by Gao Xingjian. Okay too, super formal play, nice. It seems very old, but it's not a super old play, but it's from the 2000s or so. Yeah, it's from 2000, 2001, but it seems like an old classic, Oriental play. It's okay. I also read two books that are not plays, but are like about people who do plays. This is Directors on Directing, and it's by Toby Cole and Heather Craig Chinoy. Cole and Chinoy made a collection of books about actors, about acting, directors on directing, playwrights on playwriting. Years ago, I bought the playwrights on playwriting while I was in Hastings, and I never finished it. I didn't finish this ones either, but I skimmed through them and I read a bunch of their essays. Some classical directors are in here that I know, not all of them, but Stanislavski is here, Reinhardt is here, Hopkins is here, Meyerhold, Brahms, Brecht, and Elia Kazan. It's like classical directors are over here, and it's an interesting way of accessing what the directors are thinking when they're making plays. Not super essential, but if you know nothing about directors or you want to get into it, this might be a good play, a good text. Also this one, the Actors on Acting. I marked some of them because I read them with more attention. Same idea, a bunch of actors talking about acting, the processes and how they think about acting. Since I had to read so much about acting theory, this was like a fresh take on it. Like a bunch of actors talking about acting. It's cool to see how other people understand their craft or how they're thinking about their processes. Even if I don't agree most of the time, at least it's interesting to see like how people are thinking about how they're going to go on stage and what they want to present and whatnot. There's another book of theater theory that I read, which is this one. It's the Post-Dramatic Theater. I bought this book many years ago in 2009, and I didn't get around to read it because at that time I thought it was, oh, this is intense, this is a really hard book. And now after reading so much, and reading in English so much, because when I bought it I wasn't reading in English at all, but when I did now, when I read it again, it was like, okay, it's a cool take on how theater has shifted from a story-based and character-based theater into more experimental theater. When did that start happening according to Hans T. Lehmann? Why that happens? What can we understand? What is the post-dramatic theater? Post-dramatic theater understood as something that is not related to the dramatic structure, as in telling a story, a character that develops, and the story has like moments, and there's a beginning, a middle, and end. Like there's some other theater that does not follow those rules and creates like landscape of images or walls of text or textures in the voices, or like there's a relationship with the bodies on space that is not exactly related to a story, it's not exactly related to a character. It can be related to an experimentation, a concept, a sound, movements of space, whatever it is. Like there's a bunch of things that are not connected to drama that it's worth paying attention, and Hans T. Lehmann makes like a somehow compelling argument on how we can understand this. I may agree or disagree on some of these things, but it doesn't really matter. It's an interesting book. If you have no idea what post-dramatic theater is, if you have ever heard about it, and you want to know what it is, well, this is the book you're looking for. The title is here, and it's like the main thing from this style. Alright, let's get into the chunky boys. This is the theory section. Where do I start? This one. I'm reading this one. I'm not done yet. I'm here. I'm almost done. I'm just a few pages away from finishing it. This is Elaine Scarry, The Body in Pain, and it's a very interesting book about the philosophy of pain. She goes about torture, situations of stress, destruction of the body, what is the phenomenological experience of the body once it is in pain, and how that, the main argument is, how the act of feeling pain is the act of destroying or unmaking the experience of language. So when you're in extreme pain, you can't talk, you just like uttering like sounds or like these moans or whatever. The destruction of language when you're in a situation of pain, what does it mean? How can we understand it? How can we understand the act of torture in a theoretical way? What does that mean? When someone is being tortured, what is the power relation going on between the torturer and the person who's getting, the torture inflicted upon their body? What is the relationship with the body from the person who's being tortured? And so on and so forth. It's written in a third person, but always being aware that the experience of pain is non-transferable. So it's talking about how the other person feels. So it is a first person experience in the sense that all the philosophy that is derived from this is derived from the experience of feeling the pain. And then it is transposed into what does that mean? What is the implication of it? How can we understand pain in a broader context? And so on and so forth. It's an interesting book. It is a slow burner book. There are some sections that I think they're just too long, but she makes nice connections between like what's the difference between a tool and a weapon, and when does a weapon become a tool, or when does a tool become a weapon? What is the relationship between inflicting pain on the body from one on the other, or like helping the body? What is the role of technology in the development of pain or the self-perception of the body, and so on and so forth. Next one, The Myth of Metaphor by Colin Murray Turbine, and it's okay. I didn't finish it because at some point it starts going into math and graphics and geometry, and I'm like, okay, you don't need to do this. In general, it's okay. I was mostly interested because I have been really into the relationship between myths and metaphors. I think there's a deep connection there. And the books that I've been researching, they all talk about that at some level. I just landed onto the theme of myths because I was interested in metaphors, and then suddenly I was like, oh my god, myths are an integral part of how we understand metaphors and the use that metaphors have in everyday life, and how can we understand that, blah blah blah. So I thought this book was going to give me a lot of bridges. In reality, it just repeated things that I've already got from other books, so it wasn't like mind-boggling. If you're just starting into myth theory and metaphors, this might be a nice overall perspective, but as a standalone book, like for the research, it didn't do much for me. Something similar, but not on the same avenue, happened with this one, Metáfora Lingüística Cognitiva by Emilio Ribano Fischer. Emilio Ribano Fischer is the son from Juan Ribano, probably my favorite Chilean philosopher. This book is pretty cool. It goes about, cognitive linguistics and the relationship with metaphor. It's more or less summarizing the arguments by Lakoff and Johnson in the metaphors we live by, and some other authors about cognitive linguistics, the relationship between how do we understand metaphors from a cognitive linguistic perspective. That is, we have a body, and our body dictates the way in which we understand the world. So there are some metaphors that are integral to how we navigate reality, like everything that is good is up and everything that is bad is down. I'm feeling down. You're going a downward spiral, or hey, this is very uplifting. That kind of thing. The idea that up is good and down is bad is part of cognitive linguistics. It's much more complicated than that, but it's on that avenue. The idea that from your bodily experience of reality, you derive language, and that language contains metaphors, and from those metaphors you can derive knowledge for, greater group of society, and what does that mean, how does that work, what are the implications, and so on and so forth. It's a cool book. If you're just starting and you don't want to read like Lakoff and Johnson, or you want to read it in Spanish, you can find it. Or if you just want to get a summary of like cognitive linguistics, what the hell is cognitive linguistics, how does it work, this might be a good introduction to that topic. In a similar fashion, this book, Metaphor and Thought by Andrew Ortony, does basically the same thing. It's a collection of ideas, essays, and pieces of writing from other authors, classical authors from, metaphor theory, Max Black and Rumelhart, Sarle, Levin, Morgan, Schoenredi, Lakoff, of course. Just all the Richard Boyd, all the classic Richard Meyer, all the classics from metaphor theory are over here, and they give like really detailed accounts on how does metaphor work and what is the importance of it and how can we understand it. I highlighted a bunch of this book because it's a really interesting book. If you want to get into metaphor theory, like for realsies, and see what's up there, this book might give you very cool pointers. There are some essays that are better than others, but as a general notion, this is a very cool collection of essays about metaphor and more or less the academic conversation regarding metaphor theory, because it's not an easily accessible academic conversation. You need to dig into it. It took me some time because at the beginning I was like, oh, who else is thinking about metaphor? And there were so many authors writing about metaphors, and I was like, how am I gonna understand the overall conversation? What is the topic being discussed? What are these people thinking? Well, this is your answer. If you want to get seriously into metaphor theory, this might be the best overall entrance to the general conversation, the general academic conversation of metaphor theory. Memes in digital culture by Limor Schiffman. I had high hopes for this one, but I feel like it fell flat. It seems like an interesting book. It seems like it's going to give you a bunch of insights, and I got into meme theory because I was coming from metaphor theory, and metaphor led me to myths, and myths led me to memes. Here I am reading about memes, and there's not much here that I wouldn't have been able to think by myself, and that is kind of frustrating because I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. And if I can think about the things that this book is giving me, then probably there's not much happening here. I'm not saying it's a horrible book, but if you have thought about memes for a while, or you know your way around memes, I think I have a pretty good understanding of how memes work, what the current memes are, what's the difference between meme and viral, and all of that. What is the level of replication or dissemination of a meme among nets, and what does that mean, how does that work, blah blah blah. I've thought about that for a while, so I know my way around these ideas. So when I read them here, I was kind of underwhelmed. It didn't do much for me. I read it with care. I highlighted sections. I was like, okay, I want to really understand the arguments, right? So I was separating the arguments on like, this is the first part, the second part, and the third part of the argument, and now it's talking about the different modes in which the argument works. And I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be amazing, but it never got really in depth about anything. It was just presenting, I'm going to show you a complex tapestry of information. And in the end, it was like, okay, it's fine, but it's more like a map. So if you know nothing about memes, this might be a cool thing. If you have never touched the internet for the last 10 years, this might be a good way of getting into memes. I don't know, man. What am I saying? Susan Sontag, illness as metaphor. In this book, she goes in depth about two metaphors mainly. AIDS, of course, it's in the title of the second essay. But the first one is about tuberculosis. Tuberculosis and cancer. Those are the three diseases that she goes into. And the difference between how we understand the metaphors that we use for tuberculosis and how can we understand the metaphors we use for cancer, and what is the... When we, for example, when we understand cancer and we're trying to deal with cancer, what are the metaphors that are entailed with the idea of cancer? This idea of the body attacking itself, there are levels of shame that it's complex to talk about. I have never had cancer, but many of my friends have. Many of my family members have had cancer. So I can't say I don't have first-hand experience with cancer, but I am pretty familiar with the disease. So I don't have much problems talking about cancer openly, but I've noticed that it is a taboo subject. Like whenever somebody has cancer, it's like, oh, well, how's your disease being going? You know, it's like there's a little of shame or not wanting to make the other person feel bad, and there's a narrative of like, oh, cancer is a self-created disease, so you're killing yourself, and there's like this shame and sadness involved into it. All of those metaphors is what Susan Sontag goes about. And the difference between how society understands cancer and tuberculosis. Tuberculosis has this romantic, you need to go into clean air and fresh things and smell life and then go out in the open. And there's like the difference between like the romanticism of tuberculosis, like, oh, it used to be thought as a disease from the romantic people, or like the big, people who felt too much and were like too much in love, or felt too much as an artist will get tuberculosis. It was like an artist's disease. So the difference between those two diseases and AIDS later on, and the AIDS epidemic from decades ago, and those three diseases and how they're connected and which metaphors are working and not. It's a cool book. It's a cool book, and she goes from metaphor theory to diseases really quickly. And that bridge is something I would love to, grab and understand and use for my own research. How can I talk about metaphor theory without zooming in too much into metaphor theory, but just using metaphor theory as a tool to talk about something else? Cool book, recommended. Boop. Black Skin, White Masks by Frantz Fanon. This is a classic of classics. It's a classic book of race theory. I actually finished it. I was like one page away from finishing it, but I got the argument. It's fine. Cool book. It talks about the experience of black people in the colonialism, and how it feels and how it works, and what is the perception of whiteness and blackness, and how these two things are related. It's a very interesting book. Fanon goes about a bunch of things that me, even though I'm obviously not black, but as a Latino person living here, I can understand a lot of the arguments that have been presented. Some of the arguments are the very same arguments that Juan Ribano was making in his book Cultura de la Servidumbre, when he was talking about the myth of the European and how Europeans see Latin Americans as these second-class citizens, and how Latin Americans see Europeans as, this very cultured people who are bringing culture into the world, and we have to bow to them and try to understand them, speak their language, become like them. There is something about the desire of becoming this European other that is very powerful, and it's basically what Frantz Fanon is going about, and how that in this case is related to blackness, and how the act of trying to be a black person behaving as a white European person has the consequences. What is this self-alienation process? He really wants to go into Hegel, and he seems to have read Hegel, but the way in which the arguments presented seems more like Marx than Hegel, which is fine. I don't mind. This book was written a long time ago, so I'm not expecting somebody who wrote a book in 52 to be extremely versed in Hegel. Hegelian scholars have been discussing these topics for a lot of time, many decades, and there's still no big consensus, but at least there's an attempt to go about it. Seems more an argument made from Koyev, and then made by Sartre, and from there Fanon takes the idea. So he's a big fan of Sartre. Sartre, I don't know, that guy, Jean-Paul Sartre. So he really likes Sartre, and he talks about him, and from him he's quoting Hegel and understanding Hegel and whatnot. But in reality, the argument is a Marxist, materialist argument about the self-development of consciousness and how your experience of being in a specific body, in a specific context of the world, in this case colonialism and imperialism, gives a specific mode of behaving in the world which has consequences, and he goes about those consequences. Cool book. If you're just starting on black theory, this is a pretty good introduction. Next up, Logic and Existence, Jean Hippolyte. I am not done with this. I'm halfway through. So far, it's a cool book about Hegel. Yay! My favorite guy. So yeah, Jean Hippolyte is probably the most important commentator on Hegel. He made the book Genesis and Structure of the Phenomenology of Spirit, and now he has this, well, not now, now I was reading this book, Logic and Existence. He goes about Hegel's arguments, and what does Hegel understand by logic, what does Hegel understand by existence. The title seems very big, like Logic and Existence, but in reality, he's mostly talking about Hegel's concept of logic, and the development of this dialectical logic, and existence, and how something has being, and how something is existent or non-existent, or has being and has no being, how being is developed, what is the becoming of being into existence. It's cool. It's basically a summary of Hegel's argument in a very organized way. I like it. I always like reading about Hegel. It's my favorite guy, so thumbs up if you want to get into Hegel but you don't want to read Hegel. This is a pretty cool book, and it has some excerpts. Like, he quotes Hegel in paragraphs because he's a serious Hegelian scholar. So when he quotes Hegel in paragraphs, you can read the author in his original form and then Hippolyte's commentary, and they're usually pretty spot on. Next one, Elias Canetti, Crowdsome Power, Masa y Poder. A friend of mine recommended me this book. I have not finished it. I'm here, I gotta be honest, but I got the gist of the book because it's pretty similar to other books I've read in which they're analyzing an object from different perspectives, and each chapter is a different way of looking at the object. In this case, they're talking about crowds, masses of people. How do crowds behave? What do they do? How do they go about it? What are the consequences of big crowds? What are the downsides, the upsides, how do people behave in big groups, and how can we understand that? What is the philosophy of crowds? That's what Elias Canetti is doing. Beautiful book. Just by reading the first page, you can tell the book is going to be a treat, and it actually is. It is a super, super cool book. Like, listen to the first line of the book. There is nothing that man fears more than the touch of the unknown. He wants to see what is reaching towards him and be able to recognize or at least classify it. Man always tends to avoid physical contact with anything strange. In the dark, the fear of an unexpected touch can amount to panic. Even clothes give insufficient security. It is easy to tear them and pierce through the naked, smooth, defenseless flesh of the victim. And by the end of the page, he says, as soon as man has surrendered himself to the crowd, he ceases to fear its touch. It's beautiful. It's very, very, very well written. It's a very nice reading. So if you want to go into theory, but nothing too heavy, and you want to get more into something you can actually, think about concrete things in normal life, then Crowdsome Power is a beautiful book, super nice, highly recommended. Next one, Benny Shannon's The Representational and the Presentational. It's a book about representation, which is a topic I've been thinking about for a while now, but I need to get more in depth about it because I am very ignorant about representation, so I'm just starting my research. But yeah, this goes about representational theories and computational theories, and why a computational theory of representation is not enough to understand the mind. It's very technical, so it's way drier than what I thought it would be. That's why it has taken me longer to read, because I thought I was going to get a very technical, clear argument for representation, and in reality I'm getting more or less a map of different theories, ways in which we understand representation from the philosophy perspective, from the computational perspective, from the psychology perspective, and it's giving you like this different positionalities of representation, and then you can make your own argument. But it's a long book, and it's not as engaging as other texts by Shannon. So it's okay, but it's pretty dry. Next up, Wild Materialism by Jacques Lesra. And I'm halfway there. I need to finish it. I just haven't had the courage to finish it because it's mostly political theory, mixed with ethics, mixed with materialism. So I like materialist philosophy as a Marxist Hegelian. That's my jam. That's why I got it. Like, wild materialism. This sounds wild, and it's okay, but it's very heavy towards political theory and authors that I'm not familiar with. So it's been kind of tiring to navigate. It's okay. Like I will need to go about the notes again to get the main arguments, but the book is mostly touching the topics of sovereignty. That's what it's doing. It's giving an argument for materialism, sovereignty, what is becoming sovereign means, what are the upsides and downsides, and the ways in which sovereignty is presented. So it's mostly about sovereignty and its relationship with philosophy. It's okay, not mind-blowing, but it's fine. And finally, my last book of theory, it's this one, Singing to the Plants. I am not done, but I'm almost done. It's a beautiful, beautiful book about ayahuasca, about the tradition of ayahuasca and the mestizo shamans in the Amazon, and how they go and they sing to the plants and they get the powers of the plant, and they go in these ayahuasca trips, and the visions they have, the tradition they have, the songs they have. It's so beautiful. If you have no idea about ayahuasca and you might be interested in learning about it, this is the book you're looking for. Beautiful book. This is poetry, The Beauty of the Husband by Anne Carlson. Amazing book, beautiful, a bunch of poems that are, she calls them tangos, about a couple who are, splitting, and the husband is cheating on her, and how she feels about that. Beautiful book. This one is Apuntes para una historia de la dictadura cívico-militar, by Juan Cristóbal Romero. Beautiful book about the Chilean dictatorship. It's only in Spanish, sadly, but if you're in Chile and you're looking for a book about the history of your country that it's like interesting and beautiful, this is it. It's just pieces of moments. It's not properly poetry, but you can read it as poetry. It's just pieces of news assembled as a poetry book. And this is a novel, Gerard de Nerval. It's Sylvie, a super nice short novel. Umberto Eco's favorite novel. That's why I read it. It's an okay book. It didn't blow my mind, but it's nice. I just don't read novels anymore. This is an illustration book by Alec with Pen, 400 drawings in the mail. I purchased it recently, and it's just drawings and little cartoons he made for people. He was sending these drawings in the mail to his followers on Instagram, and it's a very cool collection of images. I like it a lot. In the same vein, this is Fran's book, The Ugly Sketchbook Uno, and it's a collection of Fran's drawings, and it's very nice. And it goes about all her, I guess it's 2 sketchbooks that she has, that she uses whenever she wants to sketch quickly. So she made this book, and it's basically the same as this other one, like a collection of work that is presented in the form of a book, so you can have it. And it's a very nice coffee table book. I have it on my table, and it always draws a lot of attention. Beautiful book, super nice, like everything that Fran does. That's it. I hope you enjoy my summary of all the books I read in 2021. I hope you're having a good time, and I hope you are up for reading. If something from what I show you got your attention, go for it. The ones that I really like, and the ones that I didn't, it's worth giving them a try anyway. Like, maybe your mileage may vary and you're gonna like them more than I did. I hope you're having a very beautiful end of the year, and I will see you super soon. Take care. Mwah! Bye bye, guys.